I am absolutely ecstatic for this episode today. We have none other than RJ Santillo, producer at 98.7 ESPN New York, local sports radio here. Produces the morning show DiPietro Rothenberg. Shout out to the company. If you're watching the fan group there, he also used to work on the Michael Kay show, the afternoon drive show. Michael Kay, of course, works in the New York Yankees, if you're familiar. And he's all around just a great guy, great interview. I really appreciate the time he spent today, and I think it's an awesome conversation you're going to really like. So that's what we're doing on this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. Well, but wait, first, gotcha. Since I'm not going to cover in the interview, if you aren't already following us on all our socials, links are in the description. I really appreciate the support all over there. At Lots of Thoughts Sports on most places, but we're at LOT Sports Pod on Twitter. If you're on YouTube, leave a like. If you're on a podcast platform, rate us 5 stars. Subscribe on the YouTube. Tell your friends. Thank you very much for all your support. Now, without further ado, let's get into the interview with RJ Santillo. All right. I am absolutely honored for having the pleasure of RJ Santillo of 98.7 ESPN on the podcast today. He's the producer of DiPietro and Rothenberg, the morning drive show on radio. A New York guy, graduate of SUNY Brockport, if you're familiar with the area. So it's really just an honor, RJ, to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, honor is strong, but anytime, Dylan.
All right. Well, I just want to start out. I have been a fan of yours since you worked on the Michael Kay show in the afternoon drive. And you're actually what drove me to listen to DNR in the first place. I heard you were switching over there, and that's what I was like, oh, I didn't know, I'm not familiar with the morning show. And so I started listening right as I moved to New York. So it was like an interesting, sync in the time period of my life. So you definitely have driven me to both shows. I really appreciate all the work you do over there.
I appreciate you saying that. As soon as this is posted, I'm sending it to my bosses. So you're one of the first people I've heard say that. So it's going right to them.
Absolutely. So I knew, like I mentioned, I knew you from working in the Michael Kay show, but I don't know anything about your history before that. How did you get into a position at ESPN? Is that something you always wanted to do, to work for that company or work in sports media in general? Was that your dream from the start, or how did you end up at this point?
Yes, and yes, absolutely. I grew up like most people. I'll give you the short version, and I watched a ton of ESPN. I mean, when I was growing up, obviously, was I barely missed the the smartphone era. So you watch TV, you watch ESPN, and I knew the brand. I loved the brand. I thought it was awesome. Once I got through high school, and I went to college, and I kind of had to decide, like we all do, what we're going to do with our lives, which is a pretty heavy decision when you're 17 or 18. And I figured, well, I love sports. I've played sports all my life. I realized that I kind of suck too much to keep playing beyond where I'm at. So the next logical step was, how do I stay involved in it? So I got into sports broadcasting, tried some TV work, some radio work, some writing, some journalism, covered a lot of games, and I just kind of figured out what I like best, where I fit into the puzzle. And now the platform of radio, podcast, however you want to look at it, like the audio space at the time was very open in format. And what I mean by the more opinion based, and now that's transferred to everything. Radio, podcasts, TV is a lot more like that. All the debate shows, like when I was coming up, right. I mean, there were a couple here and there, but like PTI was the big show. Around the Horn was just getting big, like when I was coming through college and stuff like that. So, but now the space is everywhere. Like
right.
Opinion, it's turned into an entertainment platform. But I was intrigued by that. I thought, when people have the scores and the stats, what do they think then? Who tells them what to think, what to react to? And I was always intrigued by that. It was always a dream to get to, a market like New York, a company like ESPN. I truly could have only dreamed of, and I mean that. It's been a heck of a ride.
That's awesome, man. I wanted to ask you, just when it comes to working at ESPN, so I empathize with you a little bit, but in an opposite way. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm a New York sports fan. My mom's from New Jersey. I grew up a Yankees, Jets, Nets, Liberty, Devils fan. And then you, on the opposite hand, you from New York, but you're a San Francisco 49er fan. Do you ever, when you go to work, I notice myself doing this, right? When a team has success in the Bay Area, especially the Warriors are the most prominent example of this. I just kind of root against it because I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that, Kevin Durant lights it up for the Warriors and then he doesn't do it for the Nets, doesn't lead them to a title. Do you ever go to work or just in general root against the teams that are in your market that you're not a fan of, just so you don't have to hear it from the hosts on the show the next day?
I absolutely do not. And I will tell you why. It's just because I feel like anything in our market that when teams are doing well, I feel like that's just at least 1, 10, 1,000, 10,000, a million more people that are interested in the umbrella of what we have to offer. Not to say they're going to find us immediately, but I just feel like the more people you bring to the party, the better. And I mean, listen, it helps. I didn't really grow up having a problem with any of these teams. Like I can tell you games we've had in the past, been eliminated, but there hasn't been too much crossover with, like, I'd say the biggest rivalry I have with anyone as far as teams is the guy that I work behind the scenes with, a guy named Ray Santiago, and he's a Cowboys fan. I'm a Niners fan. We both live in New York, so it's kind of a harmless rivalry because we are supporting two teams not in the market. But I kind of take off the fan hat when I go to work. And I'm always a fan. I'm a fan of everything. I don't pretend to be play it down the middle, things like that. The passion of what we do is what makes it fun. But as far as how I approach it, there's definitely a professionalism to that as far as what people want to talk about, what they want to hear about, the brands that are popular and stuff like that. So I feel like if I start crossing teams off, that wouldn't be good for business, as they say.
Right. When you say professionalism, that's something I always think about when I listen. Like, it's sports talk radio. For those that don't know and don't listen, especially I think some of the younger viewers might not have access to a radio if they're not driving yet or whatever. But there's a lot of calls from fans, especially Yankees fans. I'm a Yankees fan myself. A lot of Yankees fans who think the world is ending. Right. Think that if Aaron Judge strikes out too many times, he's not a good player anymore, or, all these wild takes about how the Yankees aren't doing well because they're used to championships and the 90s dynasty or whatever, championships before that. I wonder when you work on a show where you're not one of the two main voices on the show, but you have the ability, if needed, to hop on. Do you ever just like resist the urge? I guess you have to channel that professionalism to not just snap at someone with a ridiculous take, huh?
Never snapping. I guess the only time that it gets interesting for me is because once people get onto the air, I'm kind of like I'm the screening process. I'm TSA at the airport. I'm just to make sure you're here for the right reasons, get you through. And once you get on with Dave and Rick, you're on the plane. You're in their hands.
Right.
You're in their hands now with the host I work with. But me in particular, it gets interesting when people are clearly frustrated. I love the passion. Like that's the Northeast. People in the Northeast are super passionate about their sports. Like I know, like the Bay Area, I spent a little bit of time out there. I know people are passionate and things like that, but there's so much to do. The weather's awesome. It's not like LA or Miami, but when there's other stuff going on, when the team is bad, there's a segment of people that kind of check out. Right. But here, people, I don't want to say they're happy when they're miserable, but they're still into it when they're miserable. So sometimes I'll pick up the phone and they call or check our Twitter, and people are they just need someone to outlet to, and I'll pick up the phone and they start yelling at me. And they're not yelling at me, but they're yelling. And there's times I gotta be like, hey, listen, I mean, we'll get you. I understand you're frustrated. A lot of times we like the same teams, we have the same points, but yeah, the passion is what makes this market wild. And you hear a lot of similar stuff about markets all over the country, but the Bostons and Philadelphia's, a lot of that's true.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that really breeds the overall success of the industry is the passion. And New York, especially, I find, and if you compare it to the Bay Area, I think that's a good comparison, or even LA. When you have fans of a team, when there's two teams in a market, I think oftentimes those fans don't really have commentary of the other team besides, they suck. But I think in New York, you get a lot of Mets fans who have opinions on situations with the Yankees, and a lot of Yankees fans who have opinions on the Mets, and Jets and Giants just the same way. So it really presents kind of a unique dynamic with that passion that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like not anymore because I know they moved, but I think a lot of it was Niners Raiders. Like I know Niners fans had opinions of the Raiders, and Raiders fans had opinions of the Niners. I don't want to say every team is like that, but a lot of them are. I wouldn't say it's there with the Knicks and Nets. I think Nets fans really don't like Knicks fans. I don't think Knicks fans care too much about the Nets. But I mean, Rangers, Islanders are like that. Jets, Giants, it's more of a battle for relevancy. I mean, they play this year, so it's great, and they're both expected to make the playoffs. So I think you got some of that buzz there. It's not always there. And of course, Yankees Mets. That's the creme de la creme of rivalries around here. They, like you said, Mets fans have opinions on the Yankees. Yankees fans have opinions of what Max Scherzer did, and Mets fans have opinions of Aaron Judge yesterday, kind of peeking for whatever he was looking at. So everyone's got thoughts, and that's what makes it fun, because even if your team stinks, you just start rooting against the other team. And there's a lot of people here that do that.
I guess that situation in the Bay Area is also impacted, like you said, by the Raiders moving. And then the only other sport with two teams is the Giants and the A's. And albeit how relevant the Giants have been over the past 5 years, the A's have been one of the least relevant teams in sports. So that's also something that fuels it, certainly.
Yeah, and it sounds like your A's are on the move to the Vegas Strip, I was just reading on the way home, actually, where the Tropicana is. So
yeah, I had a whole podcast episode about the A's, and I'm not an A's fan, but I grew up going to the Coliseum and, going to A's versus Yankees games and such. And it's ownership there breaks my heart. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit, get your opinion on a recent conversation. And you guys talked about it on the show, Rick and Dave on DiPietro and Rothenberg. I should say, I missed this at the open. Shout out to the company if anyone's listening. But I wanted to get your opinion on the conversation around failure in the NBA, just as someone who's kind of closer to local opinions in New York, but also sports opinions in general. I think we had the quote from Giannis that said, seasons aren't a failure. It's all about progress, yada, yada. And Embiid kind of following that up and saying that, the season can't be a failure, even if they didn't win the ring. What's your take? I haven't heard your full opinion. What's your take on this? Do you feel the 76ers and Bucks seasons were failures in general? Do you feel every team that doesn't win a ring is a failure? What's your outlook on that?
No, every team that doesn't win a ring is not a failure. Absolutely not. Like the Knicks season was not a failure.
Agreed.
But I do think when you have heightened expectations, there are failures. It's cut and dry. You can only climb so high without getting over the hump to where you want to go. And the only reason I say that is not to crush Giannis or Joel Embiid. You don't need me to tell you how great they are, what they do. But the reason I say it is a failure because those guys are locked into long-term max contracts. Both their head coaches are gone. So I think that tells you something, that whether it comes from within for the players, maybe some of them are singing a different tune when the cameras aren't rolling and the iPhones aren't around, or it's a general manager, or maybe it's ownership. You don't know where it comes from. Somebody obviously deemed it a problem enough to where we need to move on. I mean, Matt Ishbia comes in as owner of the Suns, shakes things up, gets Kevin Durant, Monty Williams out. One coach of the year twice, just in the last few years. I mean, clearly the edict is coming from somewhere. So it is a failure. I mean, it might not be a failure to you, but part of what happens when you take on that max contract, you're the face of the franchise. You're the guy. And while it's nice to say it's not a failure, and maybe that's your effort to protect your head coach or protect people within the organization, somebody disagrees with you.
Right.
So, and I find it hard to believe that in certain players' leagues or positions of power, whether that's face of the team for the NBA, a quarterback, you get a seat at the table as far as saying in exit interviews, you have the ear of GMs, ownership. That's how these teams work.
100%.
They don't operate in silos. So, when you say something like that, it might be a little different behind the scenes when you're actually talking. And I can respect having a stiff upper lip about it, saying, hey, you know what? We tried. We have a good group. But I do think even behind closed doors, in an honest moment, people would admit, like, listen, we only have so many years to capitalize on our prime. Why do you think LeBron changes teams, changes his teammates? The Lakers rebooted their entire team on the fly.
Right.
Because there's expectations. I mean, certain players are championship or bust every single year. They really are, at least while they're in the prime window of their playing years.
Especially in the NBA, where one player can really make such a difference. And I think it's something I talked about on my last podcast episode, but with Giannis in his case, right, he missed 2.5 games of that 5-game series. So in a way, even though the team overall failed, I can understand him from a personal perspective thinking his season wasn't a failure. But in the case of Embiid, it's almost the opposite. The 76ers faced a better team in my opinion, and ended up losing in a heartbreaking way. But Embiid's failure is the focus of the failure in that case, where he, like you mentioned, he's a max select guy, he's MVP, and he just didn't show up when the series got hot, and that's what it came down to.
Yeah, I think there's a chance we hear some injury news about Embiid. Maybe he's not all the way there. But I mean, like you said, Giannis played 11 minutes in the first 3 games. I mean, I don't step back and say, oh, I mean, the season's a failure because of Giannis. But I do think the season is a failure because of certain other players. Chris Middleton was hurt for a lot of the year, wasn't the same player. Drew Holiday's been a nice find for them. But listen, whether it's, Mike Budenholzer that was holding them back. I mean, Bud was going to be fired before they won that championship. So clearly this was bubbling for a while. You win a championship that buys you a couple of years. You're not going to get crushed the year after and get rid of you. I mean, I guess you could, but 2 years later, he's out. So clearly this was bubbling. This didn't come from nowhere. I think, like you said, that would be a great explanation. That is not an excuse. That's an explanation of, Giannis played 11 minutes. He was not healthy. He gave us everything. But like I said, someone deemed it a failure. And somebody, quite honestly, put it on Mike Budenholzer. He was the biggest problem. Now, Doc Rivers, I think the league's kind of turning into more in-game adjustments and less about turning the face of your franchise around. Like, if Doc Rivers proven anything, he can get a mess together. He can get it together quick. I think Monty Williams is similar. I mean, he took the Phoenix Suns to one. I don't know. I forget how many teams of worth of games, 17, 19. It took him to the finals. But, I mean, Doc Rivers won a title in Boston. He got LA together. The Clippers were in a rough shape. I know he had talent there with CP3 and guys like that. But it proves what he can do for your team. I think people in New York feel similarly about Tom Thibodeau. He can get you here, but he can get you so far. Now, the difference is people look at the Knicks roster. It's not of the higher degree of the league, like that top 5-6-ish worth of talent like the Sixers are. And I think that's ultimately your difference. But even in Milwaukee with Giannis, he signed a deal there. He didn't sign a lifetime deal there. You already hear some rumblings. Oh, is Giannis unhappy? That's why people move heaven and earth when they feel like there's something off to shift things around to get the puzzle to fit. I mean, sure, you win a championship. That ain't going to keep them there forever. I got news for people in Milwaukee because the next couple of years, the next coach, if they don't get it right, and let's say they're a 3 or 4 seed instead of a 1 or 2, and they don't win another title, he's got his ring now. That may give him the freedom to kind of explore. Like, hey, like LeBron with Cleveland, I got you your ring, Milwaukee. If I want to kind of explore, like, you can't hold it against me.
100%. And I think when you speak to a coach, taking them a certain way, like Tom Thibodeau and the idea around him, I think you see it across town. That's what I think the Nets had the idea of, specifically Kevin Durant and Sean Marks with Kenny Atkinson, right? He developed this team from having the worst NBA situation I've ever seen, with trading all those picks away and having Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and barely making the playoffs. And then, he kind of turned them around, but they thought he wasn't the guy to take them to the next step. And I'm not going to be the guy to say he was or he was. I would lean he wasn't, but you could see they certainly didn't make the right hiring decision straight after that, right? It was Steve Nash was abysmal, and that kind of torpedoed the whole situation. If they make a Ime Udoka hire or whoever it may be as a head coach, that can completely change the situation as a whole. So that this guy might not be the guy to take us to the next step. The next guy that comes in, you better get that right. And that's what the 76ers and other teams are looking for right now in the NBA.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just a matter of, like, when you're going to let go of your coach, you got to think of who's already let go of their coach. I mean, okay, that's what I'd say to anyone that's unhappy with their coach right now, whether it be pick a team, Knicks fans, Maverick fans are happy with Jason Kidd, or pick whoever you're looking for. And they want to go looking for the next, I want the next Spoelstra, the next great Steve Kerr, the next great thing. There are already openings in Milwaukee, in Phoenix, in Philadelphia, where people will walk into those situations, and from the moment they take the job, it is title or bust expectations. That's why they got rid of the person before you. So, yeah, it's tough in the NBA when it's the blessing and the curse, right? It's not quite like football when you inherit a quarterback at the beginning of his prime I don't think it's going to quite be because it's, the nature of the 1-game playoffs and things like that and fluky injuries where over the course of a season, if you don't win a Super Bowl, I don't, you might get a little bit longer of a runway. In the NBA, if you don't get along with the star player, if you don't make a run in the first year far enough to where it's deemed acceptable, you're year to year, you're month to month. I mean, it seems like forever ago that Steve Nash got fired. That was this season. It literally happened this year.
Exactly. So, I think when you speak of the NFL, I think that's quite topical with your 49ers, and that if you put Kyle Shanahan's success of, the team has looked good, but they haven't had the pieces to secure, a Super Bowl. If you put that in the NBA, that's probably not lasting long, but you could see the offensive development that he's had in football that I think you can't really get too special in basketball, and how, first of all, his coaching tree is already developing into being one that's successful, and he's getting the most out of guys like Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy and such. So I think he's one of the more secure. He has one of the more secure jobs in the NFL in some ways.
Absolutely, I think stability in the NFL is valued more. That I think if you're a good team year after year, eventually you get the Andy Reid syndrome where it's like okay, but you see what Andy Reid does. He goes to Kansas City and he heightens his stature. It can easily go the other way. But, the Marty Schottenheimer factor of you get right there, and you just never get over the hump. But, yeah, San Francisco was a post-Harbaugh, pre-Shanahan, were just dark years.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Tom Sula and Chip Kelly.
Yeah, it was just wrong hire after wrong hire. So I think stability in the NFL, even if you don't quite climb the mountain, is valued just because you're in the playoffs every year. It is harder to make the playoffs in the NFL, obviously, and listen, I think a lot of fan bases are happy to be relevant. I think football being the most popular sport, I think it's tough when you go through those lean years. I don't think people really, in a league where it's meant to turn over, you're meant to get new playoff teams every year. It's not meant to be the NBA where you have bird rights and you can go over the luxury tax. There's a hard cap in the NFL. Sure, you can finagle it with signing bonuses and converting money and front loading, back loading, all these different things. But fans want to be relevant. We love the NFL. We talk about it all the time. And when we talk about it 325 days out of the 365 days a year, what are people saying? What is the rhetoric? What is the narrative around your team? I think Buffalo Bills fans are starting to get, for the first time, a little impatient because they kind of realize, Josh Allen, he's tough on his body. This isn't going to last forever. But they missed the playoffs for 2 straight decades. And for the longest time, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane were, they walked on water. They weren't in the Super Bowl, but now you can feel it shifting a little bit, but there's a longer runway for sure.
Absolutely. Wanted to ask you, since we brought up your 49ers, this is something I've talked about I have family that's, of course, 49ers fans. If you picked week 1, everyone's healthy, who's the starting quarterback?
Brock Purdy.
You said that with certainty. There was no hesitation there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I wanted it to work. Trey Lance was the guy I would have taken if I was there. I'm not gonna spin it around like I would have said something different. I know far less than everyone else knows, and I'm not gonna tell you I watched his game, his game film. But like we were just saying, there's something to stability, winning games. Now, to be fair, Trey Lance, 2 years ago, that Houston game, he came in later in the year. I think it was like week 14 or 15. That was a huge game for San Francisco. They had to win that game. When they ended up losing to the Rams in the NFC Championship, he won a huge game for them late in the year. And then we watched him play Chicago in a monsoon, and Chicago had the number 1 pick in the draft this year, and San Francisco was again in the NFC Championship. So it's that game. Weird stuff happens in football. I don't understand it always. I would love to see what Trey has. It troubles me to see. I mean, I like him. I met him here. He's a great kid, Sam Darnold. When he was with the Jets, I'd work for the Jets. I did the broadcast for quite a few years, so I had a chance to talk to some of them and meet him. And he's a great dude. I wish him all the success. He comes in, and people are very high on him immediately. It actually has me thinking. I wonder if I think Purdy will be healthy. I think he's a little farther along than people would surmise, but. Just based on what I know nothing, but just based on all the information I consume. But how high people are on Sam Darnold, it piques my interest in terms of, is that because Lance is not as far along, or because Sam really has been that good in the system. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's the curious part of all this. I thought Sam Darnold was going to sign with a team that was going to kind of, or maybe it was Carolina. That's where I predicted him to go on this podcast, where he would have the opportunity to start early on and a rookie could take over, or there was a young quarterback that was competing for a spot, a la Atlanta or something like that. For when he went to San Francisco, I was baffled just because in my mind he had no chance to start from the start. But I mean, if he goes to San Francisco, there's one of two things he assumes. Either, there might not be a great option given injuries or play for week one, and he's hoping that he'll find success in Shanahan's system, which I think he could be successful. Or it's an open job and he's going to try to win it for the long haul, which I severely doubt given the amount San Francisco's invested in not only Lance, but in Purdy in terms of how much time he got last season starting.
What's interesting about the 49ers, I've noticed they will move off their mistakes. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't take that long for them to admit, and you're like, you know what? Not working. Like even look at Javon Kinlaw right now. They went out and they got Javon Hargrave from the Eagles. I mean, Kinlaw just has fifth-year option declined. They don't strike me as the type of organization that's going to pound on the desk for their guys if they realize their guys aren't working, which
Absolutely.
I find admirable because I think a lot of teams, a lot of franchises, not just football, I think a lot of people, life, companies, families, everything. We get stuck in modes where we feel the need to constantly defend our original decision, where sometimes you're wrong. You are wrong sometimes. We're all wrong. I'm wrong. And I'm not saying immediately. You don't want to be the one that's, making changes immediately 15 minutes after decisions. But when you get years worth of information, teams know these players much better than we do. When someone's allowed to leave a franchise, the best reason you can hope for is because they can't afford them. That is the most understanding and acceptable offer when someone changes teams, because otherwise, why on earth would they be letting you go? So I think when you heard Lance's name kind of, just bounced around, I do think he starts the season with the team. I actually think they start the season with all three guys. But I think you can see it coming, and we don't have a lot of information on Trey Lance. I mean, it would be interesting for another team just to see what they can do, because before you know it, you're gonna have to make a fifth-year call on him, and I can't imagine they'd pick that up as of right now. So,
right, I think the landscape of the NBA kind of has dictated the fact that he hasn't moved. I think there's a lot of teams that either have faith, sometimes misguided faith in a young quarterback that they believe is going to turn out. Or, I mean, there's not a lot of teams that are starting a veteran with no hopes to the future. You think of like the Raiders, or maybe that's like Tampa, but they seem to believe in Kyle Trask at least a little bit. So I feel like if there were more quarterback needy teams, Trey Lance might have already had a situation where he's on a new roster, but just with the situation in the NFL right now, so many guys drafted, of course, this year, I think it's just kind of limiting overall for what San Francisco can do to move off of him.
Yeah, but I mean, all the stuff I read, I think it's just a matter of getting the ball to the right place. From everything I read, like everything's there. I mean,
right.
People talk about, he's a big dude, but I don't. From what I've seen highlights and the times I have watched him, I know Shanahan likes to run him, but I don't view that as his game. Everyone says like in practice, the reps he takes, his mind is in the right spot, his eyes are in the right spot. It's just a matter of literally getting the ball there. I know that sounds stupid. It sounds it's too simple because that's the job of the quarterback. But everyone says he's, and by ever I just mean the writers, things like that. He's doing all the other stuff right. He's getting them into the right plays. He's got the cerebral part of it down. Like he's working guys off, working coverages off. He can read coverages. He's doing all the stuff quarterbacks do, all the stuff we love to talk about. It's just a matter of literally getting the ball in the right spot time after time with enough consistency. And I guess that's the difference in the NFL, right? Completing, 58% of your balls and 68% of your balls is probably the difference between being a starter and a franchise quarterback and signing a deal for, I don't know, $30-40 million a year and kind of and for a backup spot.
Absolutely. I wanted to do a quick exercise, if you don't mind, just a couple rapid fire questions. Just give me the first answer that comes to your head. Some of them I'm going to start out easy just to kind of, go into it. And then from there, it'll be a little bit more difficult. You ready?
You bet.
Okay. First one, easy. Yankees or Mets?
Yankees.
Okay, correct answer. Second question, Knicks or Nets?
Knicks.
Wrong answer. Third, no, I'm just kidding. Third question, Jets or Giants? I know you're Bills. I mean, not Bills. I know you're a 49ers fan, but Who would you pick?
I guess the Jets. I work with them for 8 years. There's a lot of good people there.
Okay, you're 2 for 3 so far. No, I'm not going to continue that. But okay, I know you're a Sabres fan, but Rangers, Islanders, Devils.
Oh, tough. Oh, I would say I work with a former Islander. I'll give the Islanders.
Yeah, he'd probably be a little upset at you if you didn't go that way. Speaking of which, 2 shows, Michael K show, DiPietro and Rothenberg.
Oh, love them both for different reasons. That one I could never pick. It's like that's like picking between your kids. I know I'm ruining the game, but they both
No,
given
okay.
me opportunities. I love all the guys I've worked with here. They've been so good to me.
That's fair. That's fair. One that's only going to make sense to people who listen to DNR: pineapples or bananas.
I would normally say pineapple, but I think I'm trending towards bananas now.
Wow, that's monumental. One to watch live, either a 40-point NFL comeback or a complete game no-hitter.
Ooh, I would say no hitter. I would love to see it. That's what else. Now 40-point that'd be history. That'd be the biggest comeback of all time.
Right.
But I don't. Every time I've ever gone to a baseball game, I've always had this thought of. I always peek at the scoreboard every half inning just to see if there's that zero still up there. I've always had that ever since I was a little kid. Now, I've never even come that close. Honestly, I think I've been to a 3-hitter. Closest I've ever done.
I went to one in it had to be 2018, the year.
Oh, which game was it?
The Yankees traded for J-Hap. Was that 2018? And I think it was
2018, 19. I think he came back for 1 more year after that. I believe so.
Yeah, and he had 6. I think it might have been 6 perfect. It was either 6 perfect or 6 no hit against the A's. I was in the Coliseum. I remember Luke Voigt had a big home run in that game, and then they took him out after 1 hit, and I was so devastated. I was like, "Oh, come on!" But at the end of the day, he wasn't that great of a pitcher for them, so I don't blame them for the decision. One team to win a World Series: Red Sox or Astros?
Oh man. I would bury my head in the sand. I can't give. My heart would explode if I picked either one of them. Oh man.
That's funny because maybe it's just because I'm a little bit younger than you, and my dad's a Red Sox fan because his mom was born in Boston. But I don't hate the Red Sox as much as I hate the Astros, as crazy as that is to say.
I don't think it's that crazy. I think for you're a little bit younger than me, so you miss those those early 2000s. Those were battles. Those were every single pitch, every moment, everything mattered to such a. That rivalry gave me some of my greatest memories as a sports fan. But to your point, they haven't both been good all that many years since.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember any of that. I was born in '99, so the earliest I can remember watching baseball was like the '08 World Series when the Phillies won. So it's been a while. Okay. One team to win a Super Bowl. I think you know where I'm going with this. Rams or Seahawks?
Rams, right? Not the Seahawks. Rams.
If I presented that as Rams or Cardinals, would you still say the Rams?
No, the Cardinals. Now we're working down the ladder. Yeah, you're
right.
working against my hatred. Yeah, I don't have a huge problem with the Cardinals. I don't really look at them as too much of not even a threat, just like a rival. I know they're in the same division, but they're for whatever reason that's another one. The Niners and Cardinals. One of my best friends is a Cardinals fan. They're rarely good at the same time, very rarely. So I'd pick the Cardinals.
Right, there's not that same juice. And then for the NBA, 76ers or Celtics?
Celtics.
Really?
Celtics. I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't have a huge problem with Boston. Philly. Maybe I'm still bitter from the 49ers lost to the Eagles, but I'm still mad at Philadelphia.
I'd agree, but for different reasons. Obviously, I'm a Nets fan, so any success that James Harden has with Philadelphia makes me sad. If you had to guess right now, what team do you think lands Ohtani this offseason? Is it the Dodgers, the Mets, the Padres? Do the Angels re-sign him?
Dodgers.
Okay.
I think he wants to stay out. I think he wants to stay out west near you. I think he'll use the East Coast teams as leverage, but I think I don't know how much more money the Padres can spend. I guess they can keep going to their heart's content, but Dodgers were a little quiet this offseason. It's got me thinking.
Right. I think if there was a situation where Machado wanted to leave and he didn't sign that extension, they could have the money to throw at Ohtani, but I would agree. Now, if the Mets did get him, Who do you think is the biggest star? Who do you think's talked about more in New York? Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani?
Shohei Ohtani, I think.
Really?
I,
Wow.
I think it'd be close, but I think we like the shiny new toy, and he would be that. And it'd be interesting. They'd be in opposite leagues. They could both win MVP conceivably for years.
Right.
But I think he'd be, he'd be new dog on the block, and I think he'd be. Boy, how fun that would be to happen. I hope it doesn't happen because I don't really want to hear about it every day. You asked me earlier if I ever root against it. I would root against that happening. That'd be good for interest in the Mets, and therefore hopefully interest in our show. But man, from a personal standpoint, having to hear about that every single day.
That payroll would be sky high. Okay, last thing, just before we go, I just wanted to ask. I've asked every guest that's worked in sports that's come on the podcast, which is not necessarily a long list, but if you had to give any advice, a lot of our listeners are in their late teens, they're close to graduating high school or just getting into college. Any advice for someone who's young and who's interested in a career in sports, whether it's in radio, whether it's in any other, sort of media production or just a career in sports in general? Any piece of advice, any one thing they should do, anything they should think about, anything for them?
I'll give you the baseline what everyone probably tells you, which is work hard, stuff like that. Show up. That's a big one. Just show up. You're gonna be in some uncomfortable situations, whether it's people you don't know, athletes, teams you don't know, all that stuff. But make yourself available. That's a big one. But beyond that, beyond the surface level stuff, be easy to work with. Don't be difficult.
Right.
Because people will look to get away from you the first chance they can. Even if you're very, very talented, eventually somebody will get sick of you and try to get rid of you. Not even saying fire you, they will just personally want to get away from you. And maybe you work together for years, and at the end of their day, they just have to get away from you. But I mean, we spend so much of the time with people we work with. Don't you want to, smile at the end of it? Like the guys I work with, I'm super lucky enough to, act the same way on the air as we do off the air. I'm very fortunate for that. But I always adapt. Adapt or die, right? I mean, everything will continuously change. Like in this space, what's the big difference between this and a radio show? You may have your own show in, I don't know, say maybe next month you have your own show, and before you know it, it's on an FM signal, and it's over a stream, or it's on YouTube, or it's on a different streaming service, or wherever. It's all content. You know what I mean? So as long as you can be entertaining in this space, you'll have a home. I mean, look, there's Pat McAfee's on YouTube, and Joe Rogan got all that money from Spotify, and Howard Stern got a ton of money from Sirius XM, and it's all content. There's commercials and there's memberships, and there's different ways you find it, but be adaptable and like I said, be likable. Don't be a jerk to people. Somehow they'll probably find their way back to you, become your boss, something like that, make your life difficult. So be easy to work with, be a good person, and keep adapting always.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to once again thank you for coming on the show, RJ. This is RJ Santillo of ESPN Radio here in New York. I really appreciate you taking the time out. And like I mentioned, really enjoy all the stuff that you worked on. Big fan of your team on DiPietro and Rothenberg. Shout out to the fan group, the company, once again. So thank you very much for taking the time out.
Dylan, thanks for all the kind words, man. Thank you for having me. You're awesome. You got a bright future, and keep doing what you're doing, man.
Appreciate it. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, I must have said it 5 times this episode, but thank you to RJ for taking time out to come on the podcast today. I thought it was a really great conversation, really great interview. If you did like this, click the like button if you're watching on YouTube, rate us 5 stars on any audio platform, and then subscribe on the YouTube if you haven't already. Tell your friends about the pod. Check out the socials. Links are in the description on YouTube or in the show notes on any audio platform. You can also find us at Lots of Thoughts Sports on most platforms outside of Twitter, where we're at at LOT Sports Pod. Give us our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com, to access all those, the podcast, the newsletter, the YouTube, the merchandise, all lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. Like I said, links for everything in the description below. Thank you very much for listening or watching this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful rest of your day.